Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And I feel like I often say this and I never tire of it. But when we get to talk with founders in whom we've invested, it's a special occasion. And so for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And Satyen Sangani will always have been the co-founder of Alation and its CEO, and has been on that journey with us from basically the beginning of Bloomberg Beta. And it's just been such a pleasure to see how the company has thrived to now having a culture that is one worth talking about how to rebuild. And so the question that we have today is one that a lot of leaders of teams and CEOs have talked about, which is, the pandemic is now an endemic, and we have some sense of the end of a phase, and company cultures have changed. And so, Satyen, the question that we'd love your perspective on, and thank you for being here, is how can a company rebuild its culture after an event like the one that we've just gone through for the last couple of years?
Yeah. Well, I think even asking the question is probably the first place to start, because, on some level, just acknowledging that the last 2 years have been so rough and that people have been in different straits, and now people have different expectations for what their jobs are, I think is really important. And then I think maybe the other thing is just to define it. So much of culture is about being authentic to who you are as a company and as a team, as an organization, and as individuals, if you're founders or CEOs. And that, I think, is a really big part of it. I think a lot of times people fail to articulate what their culture is, and then then it becomes the sort of lowest common denominator of behaviors in the organization.
I'm curious how you thought about it. I mean, we talked about it just before, that you're now in the office, but everybody being in the office is not a cardinal tenet, it sounds like, of your culture. When you think about the elements that you missed and wanted to rebuild or have some other go at, what are some of the bits that came to mind, and what are some of the kinds of things that you are working on doing?
So what's funny is that it totally was. I was this, everybody's got to come into the office every single day, and we've all got to see each other. And the informal conversation is how we build connection and tissue and how we connect. And of course, here we are. And through the pandemic and through the last 2 years, the company's done better than it ever has. And I was wrong. At least now I'm wrong. Like, maybe I wasn't wrong before, but I'm certainly wrong now. And we're doing just fine. So people don't come into the office, and now it's our culture that you don't have to, because it doesn't seem to be affecting performance.
And so what are the things that were the things where you said, okay, well, it's not that? What are the elements around which you built? Because, culture can mean so many different things. And for some people, it's, some specific ritual that they had. For some, it's a process that they go through. For some, it's just like, it's a regular event of some kind. And I'm curious, when you think about the culture you're trying to create as you return to whatever you return to, and maybe return's actually even the wrong word, as we shift into a new phase is probably a better word.
Yeah.
A better description. What's essential for you to build around?
Yeah, I think that for us, and in our case, when we did it, we tried to basically build this concept of a data culture. So what we sell to our customers, and in some ways that's really relatively easy for us, because we sell this product called a data catalog. And what we're trying to do is empower people to be curious and rational. And that's the vision statement behind our company. So if you join Alation, you're probably knowing that there's this like big highfalutin vision of trying to be curious and rational. And that's what you're trying to espouse. So, in some ways it's easy for us to say, well, that's what our culture should be, because that's what we're selling to the rest of the world. And then, of course, defining data culture is a really hard thing to do. And I have this podcast called Data Radicals, and the entire intent behind it is, how do you, as a chief data officer, as a CEO or an executive, build a data culture? And even though that's a tough question, I think, the essence of it is science. So one of our values, and I think it does start with values, documenting them, living them, repeating them. But one of our values is to listen like you're wrong. And so what does that exactly mean? Like, how can you as a leader model that you're listening? Because, I think a lot of the time our jobs as leaders is not necessarily to have the right answer, but to get to the right answer. And so that's a really good example of both, one, outlining the value, and two, taking examples where you've actually lived that value and your leaders have lived that value.
I
And
love that.
so that sort of documentation and example and being able to be really explicit about that is super important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I notice with companies that are growing is that their culture, and I probably stole this line from somebody, I just don't remember who, is like a quick drying cement, where they're constantly evolving it a little bit so that it doesn't harden. And so in a certain sense, rebuilding after a pandemic is not, you're just in the ongoing process of defining with specifics what your culture is. And I think I saw you had Amir Fradi on the podcast. And, you know, I've always seen him as an astute observer of things, but even just a simple maxim like listen like you're wrong, re-emphasized in a context where you may not have as many in-person meetings, you may be doing things in a hybrid way, you may be doing things over Zoom, definitely feels like it's powerful. Anything else you want to add before we wrap?
No, I love the idea that culture is evolutionary. And so I think in some ways, like a test of the worst cultures are the ones that don't change. And so I love this idea of just quick drying cement. And so
yeah, I mean, we say this phrase
again.
so often on This Is Not Advice, which is timing and dosage. It's like, well, some of the things are going to always stay. You know, like salt is probably going to be an ingredient in cooking for the rest of time. But like which spices change and what cooking methods and all of that. And the job of a leader and of an employee, of a participant, of a worker is to figure out what are the things that you reinvent the how, but not the what of exactly what it is that you're doing. And for those of you who are watching for the first time, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is because neither Satyen or I are giving you a prescription for what to do. We're describing what worked for him. And most advice is autobiographical, so you're going to have to write your own. And if you want to see past questions, and this one will be posted there soon too, you can go to thisisnotadvice.work, and we get our questions from all of you. And so please feel free to ask them. And Satyen, it's really just kind of, I don't even know, a treat to get to hear you having gone from a tiny little team to having a real workforce that is now, you know, trying to figure out how to harmonize and bring this data culture out more broadly. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.